Emmerdale's April Windsor could be signing her own death warrant next week as she discovers the shocking truth about Bear Wolf's forced labor ordeal. When the evil Celia Daniels decides that April knows too much, she orders her son Ray Walters to deal with the situation by killing the unpredictable teenager. Upcoming scenes see April drawn into Bear's storyline for the first time, as her boyfriend Dylan Penders tells her what's really been happening on Celia's farm. Dylan's revelation comes just as he and April appear destined to part ways. April prepares to leave the village with Celia and Ray when they move their criminal operation to Wrexham, still feeling trapped as they're using Callum's supposed murder as leverage over her. Meanwhile, Dylan has a chance to escape as Mandy Dingle invites him to come to Ireland with her. But will this newfound focus on Bear's welfare change the priorities for both teenagers? April and Dylan pressed for her to go with him, to run with Mandy to Ireland, to be done with the whole filthy mess. Part of her wanted to jump into that possibility with both feet. But what had kept her stuck, what had always threaded itself into her chest like a reluctant anchor, was Bear. Not the name, exactly, but the idea of someone else suffering while she slipped away. The thought of turning her back on a boy whose life had been bent by her friend's family made her stomach tighten until she couldn't breathe. "If he's really being forced," she said at last, voice small and brittle, "then I can't just leave." "I won't." Dylan's fingers tightened on hers, then loosened as if he could only hold her for a minute before the weight of both their choices snapped him free. They planned for 2 nights. A rickety plan: slip onto the farm, find Bear, give him a chance to run. If he refused, at least April would know, and knowledge might be the wedge that split the crooked log of Celia Daniels' power. It was brave, naive, and the sort of plan built by people who lived with the constant hum of danger and believed that boldness could be taught into survival. The farm smelled of damp hay and motor oil. A black dog watched April from under a trailer, eyes like coins in soot. She moved like a shadow, heart thudding so loudly it felt as if whoever was listening would know where she stood. The yard rolled into barns and into an open space where machinery crouched like sleeping beasts. A hung gate rattled. Voices threaded the night. Bear's cabin was smaller than she'd imagined. The door stuck halfway on its hinges, and inside the light was the color of fatigue. He sat on a straw pallet, knees hugging his chest, fingers circling like he was trying to contain a trapped insect. When April stepped into the doorway, his head lifted so quickly she heard the scrape of hair against a collarbone. "You shouldn't be here," Bear said, but the words were not sharp, they were soft, as if he'd been practicing softness and it hurt him. "And you shouldn't be here either," April answered without thinking. "You don't have to be." She came closer, knowing this was ridiculous, that a single person's hand could not eject the moral rot from a place, but letting kindness be a small weapon. Bear's laugh shivered. "You think you can make it better? They'll hurt whoever tries to help." He swallowed. "They already did." "How?" The question was a stupid, blunt instrument, but curiosity had a way of cutting through fear. Bear's story tumbled out in stops and starts, each sentence a piece of an unglued life. Promises of training, of pay, of a future that never arrived. Long hours, threats when a day's task was unfinished. Ray's temper carved the worst of it. Celia's voice was the knife that guided him. The other boys had left in pieces. Some had run and been found. Others simply went quiet and wore the farm's routine like shackles. "Why didn't you run?" April asked. It felt cruel to ask, a finger to the bruise. Bear's eyes were ancient. "Because you don't run when your debts are attached to people you care about. Because the thing that keeps you here is the fear of what they'll do to the people around you. Because I owe Celia. Because Ray," his jaw set and the word failed him. "You don't owe them anything," April whispered. "You're not a thing to be owned." He looked at her then, and something like a fragile hope flickered, an ember barely visible under soot. "Maybe," he said. They spoke for an hour that felt like 55. The farm creaked and breathed around them. April begged and pleaded, and offered plans with the hurried optimism of young people who still believed in rescue stories. Bear refused again and again, clinging to loyalty and terror like 2 small animals. He feared Ray more than he feared the darkness itself. He feared what would happen if someone betrayed Celia, and Ray sniffed it out. He feared for his own skin, for others' skins. "Please," April said finally, voice raw. "Please just come with me. I'll get you out. I will." Bear looked at the window, at the slant of light on the far field, and then at April, weighing the possibility that leaving was, in some ways, more terrifying than staying. "I can't," he said. "Not like this." When she left, April dragged her hands down her face like she was wiping mud off her skin. The world felt thinner, more brittle. She had seen the truth up close. It stank and it was real. She had failed to make him go. She had failed because she'd been right about one ugly thing. This was bigger than a single brave act. She shouldn't have been seen. She shouldered that prick of thought and walked faster. But Celia saw her. Celia always seemed to be where the light hit, even in the dim. Her arrival on the yard was like a shadow stepping into sunlight. She watched April flee with a small, unreadable smile on her face. Smiles like that were made of lace and poison. When Celia ordered Ray to handle it, the words were casual as one chooses a hat. "April knows too much," she said, voice like velvet over steel. "She can't be allowed to walk out of here and tell anyone. You'll make it look like she ran away. Nobody needs the mess." Ray's expression when she said it, the way his jaw tightened and his eyes darkened, should have warned the world to get out of his way. He was a man carved from a wrong set of morals. Loyalty and cruelty had been braided into him since childhood. To obey Celia was to survive, or so he'd been told. To disobey was to risk a cruelty worse than death. When Ray later found April, not with malice first but with nerves stretched thin, with the tremor of someone about to do a thing they know will not be undone, she believed him. He told her they were going to bury some evidence. He sounded steady, practiced. He sounded like a man on a mission. Laurel had been his anchor for a while. When he'd told her he was leaving, her face broke in a way that carved rivers along her cheeks. "We could have tried," she said, imploring, as if love was a currency and she could pay him to stay. She wanted their relationship to have roots, to be given a chance, and what Ray felt in that small, intimate moment was something like regret and something like relief. He'd never been good at giving things to people who wanted them for him. He was better at taking orders, at keeping his head down. As they walked across the field with a shovel each, the evening sighed around them. They spoke in small talk as people do when they are trying not to think about the monstrous thing they are doing. Ray's hands were calloused and rough. April's were shaking. The moon watched as if it were a mutinous citizen to this sleepy, crooked place. They set to work. The dirt came away in clods and small, reluctant chunks. The hole grew, and April tried to imagine a different future for herself as the sound of the spade punched into earth. She tried to picture Dylan's face on a ferry with Mandy, the sea cutting off her past like a sharp blade. She tried to picture Bear free and laughing and ridiculous. But the hole kept widening, a black mouth forming at her feet, and the rational shape of the world unraveled with each throw of dirt. Then the realization, sudden and fierce, that the hole was not for evidence. That it was not about hiding traces, but about making a place for silence where she could not speak anymore. The simple geometry of it hit her like a slap, the size, the depth, the way Ray's shoulders were tensed. She was frozen in a way that made sense only half the time. Her mind said run, her body said she could not. "Ray," she said. The name on her lips was a desperate prayer. "Please, don't do this." For a moment he didn't answer. His face was a map of lines he had not meant to draw. The spade in his hands was an arrow pointing at the choice he had kept from himself longer than he should have. "I can't," he said, voice small and close to a whisper. "I can't lose Mum." "You're not losing anyone by letting me go," April said, and in her eyes there was something like pleading and also a kind of furious clarity. The clarity of someone who knows exactly what's at stake. "You can say no. You can walk away. You don't have to bury me." Ray's hands trembled. The world held its breath, waiting for a man to decide whether he would be a butcher or something else. He had a child's memory of Celia's temper. He had the smell of iron in his nose from years of following orders. He had love for Laurel, for the small, wavering idea of himself that sometimes thought of doing right. But he also had fear, a fossilized terror of the woman who'd taught him to survive. Laurel's voice came then from the path, distant and sharp. "Ray, where are you?" She had been driving herself in circles with worry, and had followed the dull ache in her chest to the farm without permission. Her steps quickened to a run when she caught sight of them, and when she slowed, the sight of April caught in a half-formed pit with Ray's spade raised, she screamed. The scream changed everything. It was not loud or cinematic. It was the pure sound of someone whose heart had given up the pretense of calm. Laurel's hand went to her phone like a talisman, like an invocation, and she dialed the only number that could build walls around fear. The police. Someone else's hand reached for Ray. It was small and plain and fierce with meaning. Laurel's palm touched his arm and held it like a protest. "You can still do the right thing," she told him. Her voice was a knife wrapped in velvet. It had hurt and not hurt at the same time. "We can get you help." We can get them. You're not a part of this because you were born into it. You can be more. Ray looked at Laurel and then at April. The spade trembled, a metronome stuttering between decisions. He saw Bear in the shape of his stubbornness. He saw Celia in the way her shadow used to stretch over the rest of them. He saw his future, a bleak corridor where fear made every choice small and wrong. For the first time, the weight he carried became too heavy to keep holding. He lowered the spade. The sound of Laurel's phone dialing was a small, decisive thing. Other sounds followed. The crunch of gravel as Mandy's van pulled into the drive, Dylan's breathless yelling, a motorbike's engine that wasn't supposed to be there. The farm seemed to crack, a shell fractured by the sheer force of noise and attention. Celia appeared like someone who had been playing a game and suddenly realized the board had been flipped. Her face was a mask of indulgent surprise that fell away into fury in an instant. "What's happening?" she asked, eyes sharp. The question was a blade. The police lights arrived like blue flowers in the dark. Neighbors who'd long been kept distant by the uncomfortable gravity of Butler's farm gathered at the periphery like witnesses whose testimony had been postponed too long. Ray watched as authority stepped into a space it had never occupied and felt something like relief and shame and the sick aftertaste of nearly killing. When officers asked questions, Ray answered them in fits and starts. He told them about Bear. He told them about the way Celia ran her operation. He told them everything he could remember and a little more, as if emptying his chest of secrets could act as a bomb. Celia did not stay for long. When the police moved to detain her, she snarled and left the farm in a vindictive, cinematic hush, promising retribution like a threat polished to a sheen. There was always a way to disappear when the law looked like it would bite. Powerful people learn it like a habit. Bear was taken from his pallet under the heavy eyes of officers who'd seen similar things before and tried not to make assumptions. He walked out into the world so stunned he could not speak. April squeezed his hand like it was an anchor, like it was proof that people could be unshackled. The aftermath felt like a town catching its breath. Questions proliferated. How had no one seen this? Why had Celia been allowed to run so unchecked? Rumors mutated into theories, and then into the kind of practical action equally good and messy. Journalists asked for statements, neighbors offered testimonies, and the police set up inquiries. Ray surrendered his freedom to face what he had done and what he had not done. Laurel stayed by his side with a stubborn constancy that was a kind of medicine. April could not speak without being hoarse for the next week. She learned that courage was not a single thunderclap, but a long sequence of small decisions stitched together. She had drawn a map through darkness and found the edges. She had failed and then she had not. Bear left the farm with a small bag and a larger, fragile parcel of hope. The knowledge that someone had seen him and had not turned away. Celia's name hung in the village like a scandal soaked in rain. She became the sort of person townspeople whispered about in the grocer's and at the post office. The kind of villain who could only be defeated by the slow, unromantic machinery of law. She had resources. She had anger. She had the peculiar capacity to survive in tunnels where other people grew roots. Whether she would be put away, whether she would be tried and convicted and reduced to stories on the evening news, was a thing of procedure and the state. What mattered for the people who had been nearest to the damage was the living work of recovery. April and Dylan did not sail to Ireland. Mandy did leave, of course. She was Mandy Dingle, a force of nature who could not be domesticated by any plot. She took Dylan's hand and offered him a choice he did not take. He stayed. The village had a way of keeping people who needed to be kept, some by choice and some by the gravity of their mistakes. Dylan stayed because the thought of running without looking back at Bear, at the wreckage they had seen, felt like betrayal. It took time for sleep to stop being a series of starts, and for April to stop flinching every time a tractor revved. But time, obliging and slow, did what time does. It remade the edges of pain into something. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Emmerdale Echoes.